A very good morning, and thank you so much for having us on. My name is Sia Sango, and you're back again for another edition of our Future of Media online series. We absolutely appreciate your time and your interest in joining in on the conversations. Now, if this is your first time joining, well, as I always say, I'm not really judging you, but I am judging you. Where have you been? And what we do, though, every now and then, monthly, we have conversations with thought leaders and very insightful people. No pressure to our panel, who's coming up shortly. We get the opportunity to pick their brains and trying to make sense of the very uncertain times that we're living in. And we know it in our various industries, be it marketing, advertising, media overall, hence the title, Future of Media. So we absolutely appreciate that you are with us. And so over the next hour, we'll be having conversations with our panel. And then we also would like to open it up to you to share your comments or any of your questions that you might have. As you're watching, please feel free to comment and send those through using our live chat. But I have to say, just for some housekeeping rules, an event like this definitely would not be possible without our awesome partners who have stuck their fingers in to make the magic happen this morning. So a big thank you goes out to Time Bank, The Media Shop, TBWA South Africa, and Arena Holdings. So as I said, we would love to get your comments and questions on things as the conversation goes on this morning. But firstly, let me actually bring some context to what we'll be discussing. So as we know, in this whole unpredictable time that we're living in, I think our topic this morning is really going to shed some light on a lot of questions you might be having in your own boardrooms and in your offices. Today, we're discussing gut instinct versus data. So gut instinct versus data, and where exactly one draws the balance. I think it's going to be a very interesting one. We have a lot of people who talk about innovation, who talk about crunching the numbers, who talk about trends and making the machines make the decisions. But also when you are marketing, you aren't necessarily marketing just to machines. You're marketing to an audience who, as much as you can look at trends, they're also very emotive. They go with what they want. They're moved by things like natural disasters and pandemics. So where exactly do you find the balance? I hope today's conversation will be insightful to you to shed some light in things that I'm sure you've been going through and asking yourselves in your field of work as well. So analysis of data provides a very objective, numbers-based tool to inform brands about consumer behavior and preferences overall. But however, gut feelings and really a level of human experience can bring a more personal and uniquely human element of empathy into the marketing mix, something that, let's be honest, numbers can't often provide. So how should brands create concepts that earn consumers' attention while also respecting their privacy? A very big one. That's a very big topic, might I add. And should we be training up and coming marketers rather to love what they do and use their gut instead of purely data, or vice versa? So this is what exactly we'll be discussing over the next hour. We'll be debating, hopefully very healthily so, no one has their boxing gloves out just yet, on how much data versus gut feel should carry in building outstanding brand marketing campaigns, and how to apply owned data in a way that is creative, that is strategically effective, and that is also legally sound. So with that said, before I introduce my panels and before we get into our conversation, I would also like to bring up our poll question to you. So we have two questions that we'll be running, and we'd love to get your votes on this. The first question is, which is more important, in your opinion, when developing your marketing campaign? Is it gut instinct or gut instinct / human connection, or is it data? So option 1 is gut instinct and option 2 is data. And then our second question that we'll be running in our poll is, how much does your company invest in data? So option 1 is under 50% of your budget, and option 2 is over 50% of your budget. Please do engage with us in our live poll and give us your comments as the conversation goes through. Well, with that said and done, I'd like to introduce my panel, the people who I said no pressure to them. I put the disclaimer up again. We'll be hearing for picking their brains shortly. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce the Chief Revenue Officer at Prime Media Broadcasting. Good morning, Mr. Lindy Lekoko. How are you?
Good morning, Sia. I'm all right, and how are you?
Fantastic stuff. I can't wait to hear what you have to say very, very shortly. Thank you so much for being here. And then secondly, we have Head of Marketing at Time Bank. Yay for being one of our partners. Hello, Linda Appy. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks. Yourself, Sia?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. And then wrapping up our panel this morning, he is from TBWA, one of the global leads of data for the EMEA region. Good morning, David. How are you? It's David Urabi. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, well done. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much. So I want to start off the conversation. Let's get straight into it, ladies and gentlemen. Lindile, I want to start off with you. Why would you say data and research is so important when it comes to understanding how to connect to consumers?
I think let me start by actually prefacing my answer to say it's a really exciting time right now in the space of media, content, as well as consumption out there, where if you think about it, Sia, the attention threshold has gone down all the way to 8 seconds. So that's important to remember, because that's going to underline most of this conversation that we're going to have here today. So what is then the problem statement if the attention threshold out there in the world is 8 seconds? 85% of ads fail to reach that attention threshold that I'm talking about. And that attention threshold is what is needed to make an enduring impact. And this is according to a recent research that was actually at the recent Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity 2022. Just think about that for a second. A staggering 85% of ads fail to make an enduring impact and reach that attention threshold. And as we know, if you do want to grow your brand or make an impact, you must hit that threshold. So in getting to my answer, the role of data. So the role of data essentially is getting the right message to the right person at the right place at the appropriate time to make the appropriate decision, right? I'll repeat that. It's getting the right message, finding the right person at the right place at the right time to make an appropriate decision. And therefore, the role of data combined with instinct is context. But what is context? So let's reframe context. Let's look at Webster. So what does Webster say about context, which is important for this conversation? Webster says context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. Right? So think of those terms. So the role of data is that message getting to the right person and so that a decision could be made. But then the role of data and gut instinct is then to provide context so that that message is understood. Why is that important? That's because the message has to be understood in order for it to be useful. Otherwise, it's useless, completely useless if it's not understood. So in the context of what we speak about here today, Sia, is therefore, that message, for it to be useful, it has to be effective. And for it to be effective, it has to influence a certain outcome, which is the desired outcome that you're trying to get from that message. But moreover, it must then be within that attention span that we're talking about. Therefore, the importance of data, make sure that the targeting is accurate. Then the importance of gut instinct, and the combination of both is to provide context so that that message is understood, so that it's effective, so that it can influence the outcomes that we're trying to reach. So that's why those two things are actually quite important.
Goodness, there's a lot there in your first answer that I want to get into a little later because, yeah, it definitely gets into the meat of what we'll be looking at a little later. But coming to you now, Linda, in your opinion, and from where you are with Time Bank as well, what role does gut instinct and intuition play in advertising today?
I think it plays a big role. And I have to say, it's not just gut on its own. It has to be informed gut. And what do I mean by that? I mean, all of us, number one, we're all customers or consumers, right? So we're all observers. If we think about marketing at its core, it really is about psychology and human behavior. So I think as marketers, we have a responsibility to understand our customers to the core, listen to them, but also, try and tap into those things that are unsaid, those needs that may not be that obvious. Also, I think just from an experience point of view, based on our different jobs or different roles that we've played, that in itself gives you the ability to kind of, sense what would work or what wouldn't work based on past successes or failures in terms of advertising campaigns. But having said all that, I do think it's important to use a mixture of both informed gut and data in terms of being able to come to, what are the right messages or campaigns to drive out. And again, that also would be something that you would tap into in terms of, whether it's assessing what is the right campaign when you're getting creative out of the agency, but also as you're looking at your media mix, given your experience from an informed gut point of view and what you understand and know about your customers, obviously, and overlapping that with the data, you can then make some choices around your media mix as well.
Right. I like the fact that you say it's informed gut health, and that already says it's not really just about feeling and letting that drive you, but it's about being informed with it, bringing in some level of strategy or trying to piece together what the gut trends or direction will be. Okay, so a lot of context thus far. Thank you very much for that input. For you, David, coming to you now, are brands, would you say, doing market testing, and what works better during this time?
Yeah, we definitely have to test now. I think many factors accelerated the need for better commerce and performance marketing strategies, proper performance in which we can really attribute results to whatever we do as an agency. And with that, one of the fundamentals for delivering performance marketing has to be with testing, right? So I can give you examples of Mercedes-Benz and MTN and Johnny Walker, big brands that without testing, there's no strategy for us. And there are different things that we're testing today, and Lindili really hit it on the head of the nail by mentioning the message, the format, the timing, and the placement. Those are really the key features that we're always testing. And then there's a second key of features that we're trying to collect, and we call them signals as data. And for example, if we do a piece, and I'm going to speak digital only now, if we do a piece on Facebook or a banner or a video, there's some quantitative and qualitative variables that you can test, right? I'm going to give you examples of qualitative signals that we collect. For example, the predominant color on the piece, or if we have a female with a kid, or two friends, or they're wearing a black outfit, white outfit. If the call to action says buy now or shop now, like all those things are signals that before data in advertising were very hard to test because they're qualitative. And now we're designing taxonomy models. Taxonomy pretty much is just a way or a technique to quantify what's qualitative. And then we label all those signals as we place them on either social networks or paid ads or paid platforms, DSPs, DMPs, ad servers, etc. And then after some cycles, we do regression analysis with machine learning models. And then we're able to actually correlate, for example, for Mercedes-Benz, if we're launching a campaign for C-Class, do we need to use a silver vehicle with the ocean in the background? Or do we need to use the interior of the vehicle and with the price on it? All those things are actually signals that now we can collect and A/B test, and then decide what's working better or not, depending on anomalies, something we call anomaly detection. So definitely we need to test. We are doing it right now, and creativity is becoming a little smarter and a little more data-driven. Accelerated by a pandemic, of course, and by clients saying, okay, I really need to attribute results to what you guys do. So that actually a couple of the positive things that COVID gave us is that accelerated the way that we do commerce and performance marketing, because I think we're becoming a little, complacent and slow in proper measurement. So that's one of the few good things that, COVID left us, was really accelerating that stuff.
Yeah, look, David, you are really looking at and finding the silver lining there in the midst of what COVID gave us and in the COVID mess. But thank you for that. Lindy, coming back to you though, when it comes to problem solving, is it better to use gut, intuition, or both?
I think both, and I'll tell you why. In fact, gut alone is not enough, and data alone is not enough, and even both of them combined are not enough. And in my own personal approach to problem solving, I use a couple of tools. There's a structure that I use. So there's three main parts to problem solving. The first part, Sia, is one, identify what the actual problem is, because sometimes the outcomes of a problem are not where the problem persists. So you could be looking at the outcome of a problem and think that that's actually the problem. So you need to find the source and be very clear as to what the problem is, and align with everyone else that's in part of that problem solving, and align with all of the stakeholders that you're trying to resolve for. So that's one, identify the problem in as clear a manner as possible. Number two is align and agree on what the desired outcome for all parties. Let's say it's consumers, it's the advertiser, it's the brand, or whatever that ecosystem is. They may have differing outcomes, but that are related. So it's then good to say, once we've identified the problem and we all agree what it is, and it's clear to everyone, what is the desired outcome for all parties that are involved? That's the second part. Then the most important part is that once those 2 points are clearly identified, is the how. Now, this is then answering your question in terms of what's then important. Is it data or is it gut instinct? In my view, it's actually, these are the ingredients of defining the how of actually problem solving. It's the context must be there. You must understand what the context is. You must have all the information. I suppose that's the data that you're talking about there, Sia. Then you must identify what resources you have at your disposal to solve that particular problem. And it's then good to identify within the people that are resolving this problem, who's got the appropriate experience to reach the outcomes that we're looking for. Because you also want to reduce school fees in terms of the hurts and the mistakes that you make from the point of having identified the problem to getting to that particular outcome. And then the last element is then instinct. But in my view, instinct is born out of experience. There's two types of instincts that are there.
No, wait a minute, Lindy. Whoa. You are just dropping the gems and the one-liners. Instinct is born out of?
It's born out of experience, right?
Sure.
So instinct is born out of experience.
I will be quoting you at least 3 more times today, just based on that. Okay.
Let me qualify, because that's not a complete answer, right? So what's an instinct? An instinct is hardwired shortcuts in us as human beings or even animals. It's, for example, when there's an external stimuli, your immediate automatic response to it is how your system is wired to respond to that without you having to think and troubleshoot on the go, right? So most of that is, some of that is from experience. The other is innate to us as we're born with certain instincts, right? In your flight or flight is instinct and all of that. So those are the two types of instinct. There's instincts that we're born with that are innate to us, and there's instincts that we then develop with experiences. That I've done this so many times for so long that I don't need to go through all of the particular processes for me to get to the outcome I'm looking for. I can look at a problem and I can get to the outcome. So let me recap. So the how, you need the context, Sia. You need all of the information to make the decision. You need to identify what resources you have to get to the outcome you're looking for. Identify the people that are experienced enough to get you to that outcome. And that's where then the instinct is then coming from, to say, yes, instinct is important, which ties to what Linda had said when she said the instinct has to be informed, because you could have a wrong instinct or gut intuition if it is ill-informed. And that's where experience then comes in. So then recapping just the whole thing, identify the problem, making sure that it's clear, identify the desired outcomes, and then your how in order to get to those desired outcomes, those elements that I've just defined.
Linda, let me throw a spanner in the works a little here. We are living in an age where we hear terms like authentic content being thrown around very often, and I think rightfully so. But can you actually maintain truly authentic content in this world of trying to also get data? So if brands are solely relying on data, how do they ensure that their content is still authentic?
I think it goes back to understanding your customers, right, or your consumers. So the insights piece, right? And I think here you also have to bring in, based on your observations of your customers or consumers, you know, their values, but also their needs, right? And then as a brand, obviously you have to anchor yourself or define what is it that you stand for. But also, I think brands that, besides having very strong values that are aligned to their customers, but also stand for a higher purpose, do actually have a higher chance of coming across as authentic, because the brand values, the brand positioning, obviously that then drives the brief for the content, because the content needs to reflect what the brand stands for. And I think for us as Time Bank, authenticity actually is one of our key values. And it works for us because it also aligns to our higher purpose, which is, yes, financial inclusion, but also serving those individuals who are in the banking sector but are underserved. And what we were trying to do is to do it in a differentiated way, in a way that's simple, but also honest and transparent, which I think are other building blocks of having, you know, authentic content. And I think as a brand, if you're able to latch on to those things in terms of, you know, keeping it simple, you know, does it reflect your values? Is it linked to a purpose? But also just in terms of the honesty and transparency, because I think as brands, we always feel that we're under pressure to, you know, just be a certain way, live up to a certain standard, when in fact, just like humans, companies and brands also do make mistakes. And where brands have erred, it is actually good in terms of establishing that human connection to say, actually, here we haven't done well, we can do better. And for us as Time Bank as well, you know, simplicity is a value, but also so is being transparent, especially in terms of being able to build a relationship of trust, specifically in the digital banking space. And there have been a few instances where we've debated as a team, should we or shouldn't we? And being led by our values, we've said, actually, we had a service glitch, let's issue an apology letter. We're going to hike up our interest rates or drop them. Let's actually explain to our customers why we're doing what we're doing. And I think those type of conversations do help in terms of building authenticity.
But David, with your expertise at TBWA, why would you say it is important to use a multidimensional analysis?
Well, because there's just a lot to test, right? You have everything that we create as advertising, right, in multiple channels, but also you have very complex audiences and very complex customers and very different categories, right? So it is very different to sell airtime for MTN or selling a phone for Apple, all clients of us, to sell an automobile, right? A car. So all those consumer journeys are very, very different, very, you know, in time and signals. The way you research to buy a car is very different than the way you research to buy a phone or a t-shirt, right? So with that complexity as an audience, and also something we call the stranger with the experience, which is the power of reviews. If you go and take a lot or Amazon and you're browsing a product and it has 9 out of 10 reviews are bad, you won't buy it, you know, as simple as that. And you don't really know the people who are reviewing it. So the power of strangers with experience is very, very, very important these days, right? So when you have all these layers of complexity in audiences and also logistics and fulfillment from brands, you know, subscription-based models, rewards. And then on our site, we're trying to create messages and create advertising signals to deliver that. There are just many, many dimensions to take in consideration and in mind, right? So that's why data is so important, not only the planning stages of how people are purchasing and what are they recommending, but also as the user goes down a journey of signals and research and clicks and video views and social media engagements and all those things. There are multiple dimensions that we need to collect data for and try to start modeling a way to engage those consumers later in a better, cheaper, quicker way, right? And I guess the holy grail in what we try to do every day has to do with personalization and experience. I really believe that the only battleground that we are fighting on today in modern capitalism is experience. Whomever delivers the best experience possible will win, right? I don't think price wars, nobody wins a price war, right? You survive them. So in markets like this one, and again, as a foreigner, being in Africa where everything has to do with, the cheapest and the most incentives and buy this and give that, nobody can survive that because, again, it's a very hostile price war. We have to deliver better experiences for lifetime value, and we have to do that through, I believe that the vehicle to deliver that is data. It's not even creativity anymore because anybody can be creative. It's data that caters to experience. That's why we need to multi-level test and multivariable analysis, do multivariable analysis and testing. I hope that answers your question, but it's a very loaded question, actually.
It is. And a little earlier when we began this conversation, I did say, David, that we'll be picking your brains. I didn't think that we'd get to the point where we are now reaching into your toolbox to find out exactly how things work. Because, David, here's a question for you from the audience. Someone would like to know, this is why, they're really digging in your toolbox here to find out your secrets. They're asking you, what tools does David use to run that taxonomy tagging analysis? I have just read that as if I understand what that is, but over to you, David. I hope you do.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And we started by labeling things on Excel. It's as simple as that. We would, and I'll tell you tools now, but we started by labeling things on Excel. So one of the key things that is really hard to analyze in this market is sentiment, right? Because there are too many languages and nuances and people express themselves in very complex ways. So we found that tools usually fail at quantifying sentiment analysis. So we started pretty much gathering every comment and direct message we would get for specific brands. And then we create a specific taxonomy model that was pretty much positive, negative, neutral, and also the topic. So we created 5 or 6 clusters of topic, right? Complaints about service, post-sales, inquiries, et cetera, et cetera. So we would have a team that actually they're listening to us right now in which they would pretty much label all those signals daily. And it doesn't take long, even for big brands and with a lot of comments and messages, it doesn't take long. So we would do it through Excel, and then we will connect that Excel sheet to Tableau, right? Or Power BI, any data tool. And that was the first way we did it. And then later we found out a couple of tools to do that. And it depends really on what we're labeling, right? If it's paid media, we do it through specific APIs that we build. If it's for social media, we do it with Sprout Social. And Sprout Social is very well known for being a publishing tool. But now Sprout Social, as you publish the content, it has a feature to create labels and tags. And then we connect Sprout Social to Funnel.io, which is an API connector as well for Tableau and Power BI. So those are a couple of examples. But I think if you do it on Google Sheets or Excel, as it is, CSVs, you can start visualizing really interesting things. And one key message I want to give the audience is that you don't really need fancy tools or fancy technology to do these things. All you need to do is really pay attention, label things, and you can do it in Excel or Google Sheets, as simple as that.
Got it. That certainly answers our audience questions. So thank you for that, David. Going back to you now, Lindile, I'd like to know, how can you or our audience as well maintain a very human-centric approach when applying a gut-based analysis to challenges that they face?
Yeah, good question, Sia. In that, well, we must remember that everything that we do is actually centered around humans. And the beauty of life is that us as humans, we're very different. And our preferences are different, and how we consume things is different. There may be similarities there. It actually reminds me of a couple of years ago, I studied chaos theory. And where it speaks about culture in particular. It then speaks about psychic distance in relation to culture and chaos theory. And psychic distance is the distance between your own home culture to the culture that you take in the different spaces that you do occupy, for example, be it the workplace and everything else. That then speaks to what connects us, what makes us different but connects us, which seems to be an oxymoron. What makes us different but connects us? Those differences are very useful if we understand them in how we then can define content and campaigns and all of those particular things and connect. Because in how we must communicate, our message must land in that it is understood by a variety of different people that we target. And therefore, our work must start in actually understanding what those differences are, who the people are that are behind those decisions and what those triggers are. And in so understanding that, we then work backwards to say, okay, this is the message that needs to land and make an impact in that person that thinks that way, that's influenced by those particular things. So that level of understanding is absolutely critical. And for example, our approach at Prime Media in terms of how we've now addressed that is to look at all of those variables of the human decision, the psychology of a human decision, but also from meeting people from exactly where they are, speaking the language that they speak in terms of how they understand information and how they make decisions. So that's absolutely critical to understand. So towards the end of last year, for example, around October, we launched a new set of products that we called Connected Content Plays for exactly that, is understanding how people understand information and how they use that information to make the decisions that they need to make, but then infuse that in the day-to-day language that they speak. For example, the connected content plays that I talk about is on our radio stations, for example, an organic conversation could possibly be happening by any one of our presenters, or even a person that is external to us, or it could be a conversation that's happening in society. And then we will then infuse the messaging that then achieves a certain outcome. For example, if there's a brand that wants to speak to a certain consumer around any particular topic, it's best in the context of the conversation that's already happening. So it means that, Sia, I'm meeting you, Sia, from exactly the standpoint of where you are, the conversation that you're having, but then relating a message that I need you to react in exactly the terms that you are preferring, that you're already engaged in, without forcing you to jump out of that. For example, sometimes ads force you to jump out of something. If you're watching something, for example, it's an interruption. It's seen as an interruption in a world where you're consuming that. What we're saying is that infuse it in the content and the context of what you're already consuming instead of having that jump out. And we find that ever since we've launched it, it actually has much more impact because we're putting the human and the preferences of the person in the middle of exactly what the message that we're trying to land. So it's very critical to then understand the person, the triggers, as well as everything that drives that particular outcome that you're looking for from the person.
And kudos to you and the rest of the team at Prime Media. That's great innovation. Linda, now going back to you, how can market leaders in this day and age start to employ data-based gut feelings to make these business decisions that we are striving to?
I think it's really a combination. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. I really liked what David was talking about in terms of the work they're doing on their side in terms of A/B testing, but also the importance of personalization. So I think those are two very big trends that are specifically happening in the marketing space. But again, it also depends on what medium are you using, or rather what part of your marketing mix are you driving that? So for instance, in the CRM space or direct marketing space, definitely using data really does help. But it's also around using data in a clever way, right? So instead of us, for instance, if we want to deploy an email or an SMS campaign, instead of us deploying it to everybody where we're then incurring lots of costs, what would be better for us to do is deploy to a smaller size or segment of people, but within that, actually choose specific segments that share commonalities. And to David's point, there, what you can do is you can actually test different things, whether it's copy, whether it's creative, or pictures, as he was pointing out. And then what that then does is gives you direction or information in terms of which of those executions work that you can then deploy to a bigger base. I think there are situations where you can rely mostly on gut, specifically if you're needing to be a little bit more agile. And there's clever ways to get around that, whether it's using your employees or their friends or their families as people who would be, in research, or people that you could reach out to glean specific insights. But also, I think as marketers, we are in charge of big budgets, and then some decisions actually require you to dig deep, because you don't want to, let's say, for instance, before you spend a lot of money on a TV campaign, and you're flighting it, and you're spending millions, you actually do want to be able to sense check that creative with a select or sample of your target market, just to make sure, is the message resonating? Is the key messages that you want to drive, are they coming through? And in those instances, that's where we're really governed mostly by data, because what you want to get is you want to sweat that asset, which is your TV ad, but you also want to get a good return on that investment, so that it actually lands the message that it's meant to.
Got it. David, it might seem like another loaded question, but here goes, because we really think you can get into this. When working with people, is it better to use gut or data? Or can we even be that mutually exclusive?
When working with people, meaning your colleagues and the people you work with, or when working with people as customers, consumers? I didn't understand that a bit.
I think
I'll give you both answers.
I think as consumers.
As consumers, Lindili mentioned it again. I think he nailed it as well, saying that even God has to be educated God. I think at our level, we cannot really afford to just be passionate God workers anymore. As advertising back in the day, if you look at the 50s, the 60s, and so on, is very God-driven and passionate-driven, until planning came in and sort of changed that. I think that today we don't have the luxury or the time or the money to waste by just applying God. But there is a lot of human insight and human connection that you have to deliver, even if it's purely data-driven work, right? And we still work with creatives and strategists and brand managers that believe in the power of storytelling and the power of human connection and the power of, that makes us human. At the end of the day, you can put machines everywhere, and we need to cater to humans and deliver to humans. So even as a data person myself, I never forget and ignore the fact that we are creating as humans and we're delivering to humans, right? What data is helping us do is be a little more precise, be a little more specific, be a little more personalized, be a little more, effective, if you will. I think another big word these days is effectiveness, right? And how can we deliver that effectiveness at a lower cost and less time? And that's what data really allows us to do. But, even in what we do, and I'll give you a mathematical example, right? When we're testing things, let's say on social media or paid media or CRM or whatever, I always encourage our teams to divide everything in percentile pillars, right? So if we're going to sell this phone, let's say that we're going to create 5 pillars. One of them is features. The other one has to be with the brand Apple. The other one has to be with, take the best photos or whatever. And then the next one could be price. But then, and then we attribute a 20% of weight to each of those pillars. But the last one, the last 20%, I always sort of encourage our creatives and digital people to just test something, right? That test comes obviously from data, and we see if people, want to be entrepreneurs and their phones is their tool, or they want to educate themselves, or they're upskilling themselves with their phones, then let's try that. So that even that testing that is human and it's just for us to play around a bit and see if we can discover something that we didn't know, is educated with data, right? But we're always testing. And even when you do machine learning models, like artificial intelligence, you always need to leave a window of 20, 30% of testing of the things that you don't know. Otherwise, the algorithms keep learning on the same stuff, right? So we're humans, we have to deliver human value, but testing and data allow us to do that a little better and quicker. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, it certainly does. Coming back to you, Lindile, now, as we wrap up some of our conversation this morning, I'd like to find out from you, is it time, would you say, to be so radical and say statistics should just replace intuition overall? And if it is that time, how meaningful are data-driven decisions on their own?
Actually, this ebbs from exactly what just David has spoken about in terms of his last pillar and testing. I'm a big fan of that. I published a book last year that's called The Young Entrepreneur's Playbook, Using Failure as a Shortcut to Success. That subtitle speaks to what David is talking about, is using failure as a shortcut to success, is that you will have an instinct that perhaps this is going to work after you've done the work, of course. Then you test it. The testing, you're basing the testing on gut instinct of what you think is essentially going to work. What comes back to you after the testing is data. So you can't discard the other in replacing it with the other. So you do test, get feedback to say, what's the uptake? If the uptake is low, what are the reasons for that uptake being as low as it is? If it is high, what are those key drivers and pillars that led to that particular outcome? And even if it doesn't work the first time, don't see that as necessarily failure, because those insights will inform what essentially is going to work. But then it's also the quality of the question that you're going to ask when you get that particular feedback, right? So even if it doesn't work the first time around and you're aiming to move 10,000 units, for example, in the first month, and you move 10, the 10 that work, find out why did the 10 move, and why did the balance actually not move at all? But the feedback, as I said, it's data and statistics that are going to feed your iteration of that strategy. Is that, okay, maybe I need to redefine the value proposition itself, the positioning of the value proposition, or any of that kind of stuff. I remember a couple of years ago when I was in my early 20s, you can imagine this was many years ago. There was a product that we had launched. And according to us, it was a great product. It was an amazing product, and we thought it was going to make a big splash in the market. And we were taking it into the mass market. And what we did when we shrouded this in our go-to market is the best packaging, the best everything. When we went into the mass market, and I was quite young, it's one of those things that I'm sure everyone on the call and on the streaming understands this now, is that created a perception that it was expensive, even though it was not. All of that. And therefore, what we needed to learn back is that, no, we actually like the value proposition that you're sharing with us. But in the way you've communicated to us as the mass market is that it's out of our reach because you said it's the best, this is the best, that it's this quality. All of those things are triggering certain perceptions in our mind that actually this is out of our price range. So they didn't even look at the price. The perception itself alone was that, oh, out of my price range, perhaps not. So in going back to your question, you can't discard the statistics, because when we took back the feedback from the market, iterated and changed a couple of things, and then relaunched a few weeks later to much success, and the uptake was much more. So gut instinct was wrong in that particular case to say, we think this is going to work. It didn't work because of those things. We took back the feedback, relaunched it, and it worked at 100%. And I think the distance between data and gut instinct is characterized by three main things. And those things are, it's the context, as I've said, it's the ability to understand data and its uses and its implications, but it's also the experience that leads to instincts that I was talking about. See, another story I want to tell you is
very briefly. Sorry, Lydia.
Very briefly. I'll be very brief. There's a very lovely lady who's just joined us at Prime Media Group as the Group Chief Operations Officer. Very well known in the industry, Claire O'Neill. Over 40 years of experience. My path and hers are very different. And therefore, how we look at data is fundamentally different. And we're having this conversation the other day. I studied engineering, I studied marketing, I studied MBAs, quantum mechanics, and all of those things, abusing my brain. She's got over 40 years of experience. We look at the same data, we get to the same answer, but how we get there is very different. She uses gut instinct. She looks at key pillars of the data and says, this is what's going to happen. She gets there faster. I analyze, I have to understand methodologies and all of that. And therefore, gut instinct equals speed. My approach, which is data analytics, equals being thorough and being in the detail and getting that. But we get to the same answer. But instinct and data then can work hand in hand. Short.
Right. Linda, for you now, what should brands take into consideration when they're strategizing, and especially when it comes to data privacy?
I think data has become, specifically data privacy has become, a key pillar for businesses to weave into their strategy. I know for us as a bank, I mentioned earlier that specifically as a digital bank without branches, there does seem to be that trust gap, and therefore we have to work a little bit harder in terms of building the gap. So our customers would be worried about the safety of their money, but they would also be worried, obviously, about the safety of their data. So for us, making sure that we've got a very strong data privacy strategy is key in terms of being able to build trust. So as a company, we obviously do ensure adherence to POPI, specifically in the work that we do, specifically in the direct marketing space. And as we collaborate with our data team as well, or our data scientists. And then also, we've got a very clear data protection strategy, which is around how we protect data, what procedures we use in terms of that. Also, preventing data breaches internally or externally. So there's a lot of training, there's a lot of emphasis around that. How we store data, how we back it up in terms of recovery as well, and then also monitoring and reviewing that. So this is something we really take seriously.
Got it. And then with so much that's been said this morning, David, I want to give you a bit of the final word here. On our topic this morning, just to close it all off, what would you have to say to leave with our audience this morning? Is there a sweet spot between data and making gut-based decisions?
Is there a sweet spot? Yeah, of course there is. I don't think there are
and
any...
then how do we find it then? Since there is a sweet spot, how do we find it? Where is it?
I think there's nothing in life is binary, right? Like there is no, sort of black or white approach to anything. I think where we can find the sweet spot between God and data is by testing. I think the connector between those two worlds is testing. Now, my recommendation always, and I always mention it to clients especially, is you have to test quick and cheap. And if you're going to fail quick and cheap, right? So back in the day when you were building a campaign for TV and radio and all of those outlets that are irreversible, once you execute, you go live, you cannot go back and dwell on failure if you do fail, right? I think one of the cool and very interesting things about digital today is that you can validate and test before you go out there with big executions, right? So again, the vehicle between gut and data is called testing, in my opinion. And for the audience, the final message is getting that mindset of testing, but also it's not about testing just messages and platforms and timing. There's a lot of layers to testing, and there's a lot of things that the human brain kind of perceives and reacts to. And the more you interrogate those things and the more you analyze those things and the more you quantify those things, the more, the more accurate you'll be and the better you'll be. So test and test quick and cheap. That's, I think, the connector between the two.
Great note to end it off on. Thank you so much for that, David. We so wish we could have gotten into so many more questions here, and some questions also coming in from the audience. But we hope at least this morning was the first step in a conversation that you're still going to continue in your offices, in your boardrooms, and also on social media with us right here on Future of Media. So please do make sure that you keep up to date with us on our website and online. You can just follow us as well online, and Arena events to get more details on some of the conversations that we've had here this morning. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation this morning as we discussed gut instinct versus data and where is the balance there. I'd like to just thank our partners for making this morning happen as well. Big thank you to Time Bank, The Media Shop, TBWA South Africa, and Arena Holdings. And then a big thank you goes out to our panelists for being here this morning. Lindile Kogo, thank you so much. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at Prime Media Broadcasting. Another thank you goes out to Lindiwe Api, Head of Marketing at Time Bank. And thank you so much, David Urube, Regional Head of Data in the EMEA region for TBWA. We absolutely appreciate it. And as we look at finally thanking you for being part of the conversation, we cannot have a platform like this if it was not for you. And actually, as I look at the poll results for a question where we asked a little earlier about how much does your company invest in data, we hope more than 50% of you will be investing back into your data. And of course, just fine-tuning it and finding that perfect balance to balance it out with gut instinct. My name is Sia Sangweni. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you this morning. Until next time, have a marvelous rest of your day, and see ya.